Hello and welcome to Season 3, Episode 3. My name is Tom. This is the Enthusiasm Project, and today we're going to be talking about the fact that gear doesn't not matter. What does that mean? Well, if you're listening to this around the time that it was put out, which is going to be on July 12th, it is July 12th, but I'm going to put this up at midnight, so it'll be July 13th when you might be hearing this. Or later, obviously. There has been a lot of talk of gear in the camera world this week. And if you're anybody at all who's interested in cameras and camera tech, regardless of what you use, there's no way that you've been able to escape it. I can't imagine having been able to escape the news from Canon announcing and releasing, I guess, the R5 and the R6 cameras. And I've never really seen anything like this, so I wanted to talk about that for a little bit, but then dovetail that into a broader discussion about gear in general, because there's sort of like this cliche that pops up that I wanted to address in regards to whether or not gear matters. So basically, here's the genesis for this episode, where it all kind of came from. With these cameras being released, everybody's throwing their opinions out there in one way or another. And I've largely been just trying to stay quiet and just sort of take it all in and just think about it. And what I have noticed is there was a shift. There's all the people who are super excited for these cameras. Then there's the people who want to find fault with everything and, look at all the negatives, look at all the shortcomings, look at all the potential problems. And then there's this third group of people that show up and just do things and say things, like, just remember, it doesn't matter what you have, it's what you do with it. The gear doesn't matter. It's all about the story and that kind of stuff. Sort of those platitudes, which I don't mean to downplay, because there's absolutely truth to those. And I wanted to address that, though, because I think that in some cases, those can be harmful. There's the idea that your gear doesn't matter and story is king. And if you watched any YouTube, especially any of like the filmmaking YouTube channels over the past few years, there's no way you haven't heard somebody say like story is king and it's all about story. Even though a lot of times in those videos you'd be hard pressed to actually find a true story in them. But it's just this thing people like to say, and there is truth to it. And But I guess I have like all the thoughts running through my head right now. I wanted to address it because it's actually kind of annoying me for a lot of reasons. And I don't want to just rant, but I want to explain why it's annoying me and why I think it might be harmful, but also why there's value to it. So first and foremost, I have gotten so many messages and emails and comments over the past few months all about, thank you for, talking about the Rodecaster Pro. This convinced me to buy this thing and start my podcast and all that. I mean, I don't know how many friggin' Rodecasters I've sold for Rode, but if anyone from Rode is listening, hey, I'm here. I'm selling all kinds of them. But aside from that, at the end of my main Rodecaster video, and in a lot of videos, I always say, like, you don't need this to get started. Get started with what you have. I started this podcast just using whatever old audio gear I had lying around. It wasn't podcast-specific gear. I've even done videos about how you can use your phone to do good-sounding podcasts, and with platforms like Anchor and stuff, they even make that easier. So there's this, there is this barrier where people always want to start something, but they're waiting till it's perfect, and oftentimes that leads to them never getting started. And that's a scary thing to me, because I would much rather push people into just getting started rather than waiting for everything to be perfect and having all the perfect gear. And so I really believe in that. And I've seen firsthand and experienced firsthand how valuable that can be when maybe you don't feel like you're totally ready. Maybe you don't have everything you need, but you jump in and you grow from there, and it's all just kind of positive and it builds up positively from there. And that's great and exciting. So in that way, the gear doesn't matter, because it literally is, if you can't afford this $600 mixer for a podcast, but you have a phone, utilize what you got and do the best with what you can. But you will probably, after doing a few reps of that, you'll probably want to start branching out and getting some other kind of more specialized thing to help you do what you want to do just a little bit better. However, there's this battle that I've been fighting even before being on YouTube or even before having this podcast or anything when it comes to gear and the importance of gear. And it's something that I actually feel pretty passionately about. So if I am a high school digital media teacher, gear is important, right? Like I have to walk that balance every single day of my students. We don't live in an affluent area. Our school is 90% or more free and reduced lunch, which basically just means, kids don't have a ton of resources and money, like go out and buy a MacBook, go out and buy a camera, go out and buy all this gear. It's just not really a thing that happens for the most part. But through education funding from the state of California, my program gets money where I can buy equipment, and that's where a lot of that comes from, and that's where all the cameras and the software and the computers and the iPads and everything that everybody uses comes from those grants. Where it gets tricky is no matter how much funding, even in really generous years, I can never do a one-to-one thing where every kid's going to get like an EOS R or something, but I can get quite a bit of equipment, and then I have to work with kids to, hey, you need to check out a camera. I don't have any cameras available. Do you have a phone? Most kids do have smartphones. Okay, cool. Well, what kind? If it's within a couple years old, it's probably got a decent enough camera to do something. And so we're kind of like, it's this thing of you need to learn how to use this really important equipment or this really expensive equipment, but also if you can't use it, you need to utilize what you have. And I think that those things are important, but where I also get into trouble was there's an outside organization that I used to work with maybe back in like 2012, 2013, 2014. And they would like kind of host student film festivals and things. And it was good overall, but we had fundamental disagreements on gear. And it was also because they just were in the business of like, we'll get kids to make heartwarming movies and we'll put those out to the community and people will love it. And, great. And I am running a career tech pathway where I'm trying to build students actual like skills that they could use to get jobs, get into, school, higher education programs, get their own clients, that kind of stuff. So we were kind of approaching it a little differently. And they were just, it's all about story. Who cares? They would have kids film stuff on like an old iPod, just square, crappy, blurry things. And I'd be over here going like, well, I'd really prefer it, if we're using this kind of gear and that kind of gear. And we actually got in like some pretty heated arguments about it, which was some of the first times I found myself in my professional career sort of standing up to like adults. Even though I was an adult, they just felt like real adults and I was me. And it was this thing where I felt that they were devaluing the importance of technical proficiency and the fact that gear actually can matter to certain regards. If you just need to express yourself and you just need to say something, of course your phone is fine. Of course. And in 2020, there's amazing options that, really blur the line between more specialized equipment. But that's the key right there is when you need to do something more specialized, your super cheap camera, your super cheap phone isn't necessarily, I shouldn't say super cheap phone. I was just thinking because phones are totally not cheap anymore, but that's where you're just not going to be able to do it without a more specialized piece of gear. So, well, there is truth to that. I get kind of annoyed when people are just like, the gear doesn't matter, the gear doesn't matter. And I've always approached it from, if you have something that you want to share and something that you want to make, sure, you could say the gear doesn't matter. But on the other hand, if it's that valuable and that important, don't you owe it to your idea and don't you owe it to yourself to make it look and sound as good as possible? And to do that, you might need some specific gear. So that would mean the gear does matter. And if you've ever tried to make something, no doubt you've tried to get a certain look. If you're saying, hey, my phone is good enough to film something, but then you're wondering why the whole thing is in focus and you can't get blurry backgrounds or the sound isn't the quality that you want, well, then you start needing specialized gear, and everybody kind of starts small. Like, hey, my sound isn't good. What do I do? Oh, I could plug this little microphone into my phone, and great. And now, it's kind of dark and whatever. Maybe I should get some lighting. What kind of lighting? Should I get just the cheapest thing on Amazon? Should I buy more money on lighting? I remember myself personally when I bought my first DSLR camera, which was the Canon Rebel XTI back in 2007. I think it cost $800. I saved up for a long, long time to get it. and it was before video was in DSLRs or anything. I just wanted it for photos. I remember it came with that kit lens, the 18 to 55, like super standard kit lens, which is totally a fine lens you can do good stuff with. And I remember thinking that I was not interested in lenses at all because I was more interested in cameras. And I remember looking at prices of lenses and being like, God, why would you spend more money on a lens than you would on the camera itself? That's so stupid. Well, 13 years later, I recognize fully that oftentimes when you buy a lens, that thing sticks around for a long time. And your camera bodies don't stick around as long because they get updated and things change. And so in a lot of ways, it actually does make sense to invest in a high-end lens that you're going to keep for, years and years or a decade or two versus a camera body that you're going to keep for a couple of years. It's almost like a phone. And so that kind of brings us to the Canon R5, the Canon R6, which came out. And going back to the XTI, that was kind of where I jumped in and kept an eye on what Canon was doing. And, the next year after that, in 2008, is when they released the 5D Mark II, which was the first DSLR that did video. And that kind of kicked off the whole thing of DSLRs and interchangeable lens cameras that can shoot video. Obviously, that had a huge impact on the world. But I have never seen anything quite like this. I'm used to, in the past 3 or 4 years, seeing Canon be chastised or criticized for anything that they release, the 6D Mark II, the EOS R, the RP, whatever it is that they're coming out with, even like the 1DX Mark III, it kind of just gets shot down right away. Certain cameras, like their Cinema Series camera, C300, I think Mark III just came out, C500 Mark II, those seem to be universally praised, but those are also $10,000 to $20,000 cameras. So as much as I think they're great, I'm not going to be, that's not within my budget. It's not a thing I'll ever buy. So it's just kind of off of my radar. But there's this trend, and it's very annoying, where a Canon camera will come out. I remember 3 years ago, the 6D Mark II came out, and everybody was mad that it didn't have 4K. I guess that was what they're mostly mad about. It didn't have 4K, and they were saying the dynamic range was really bad, and the camera sucks, blah, blah, blah. And then about 6 or 7 months later, everybody's like, oh, this camera's actually pretty good. And you start noticing more and more people using it. It kind of rises in popularity, plus the price came down a bit. And they're right, it didn't have 4K, but it shot great video. It was like the first full-frame camera with a flip-out screen, which was kind of a necessity that people might not even realize they had. All this like hoopla over dynamic range in photos was just totally overblown, and the camera takes amazing photos. It turned out to be a great camera. And then Canon came out with the EOS R, where it's like Canon's doing full-frame mirrorless, 1080, beautiful 1080, but also 4K. Oh, the 4K is cropped. This camera's useless. It's garbage. And then, 6 or 7 months later, you just start noticing, oh, it seems like anyone who's shooting Canon now is using the EOS R. And even if you watch all the YouTube channels where they review every other camera that's revolutionary, they're filming their reviews on the EOS R. And then that camera, the new revolutionary thing, gets sent back, and then they keep the EOS R. I'm always interested in that when people are filming reviews and they're talking about a thing, and it's like, cool, it's nice to hear your opinion, but what is it that you're actually using to make this stuff? Because it doesn't seem to be the thing that you're reviewing sometimes. It seems to be something else. And that's just kind of where Canon has been, just sort of chugging along. Yes, there's room for improvement in all of those products. I used the EOS R for over a year, and I love it. And of course, there's room for improvement. I made my review video on it where I talked about some of the things that I wish were different about it. And where the difference comes in is with the R5, which as soon as it was rumored, I've never seen people so excited for a camera, much less, a Canon camera, especially recently. And it was just like the hype kept building. And so in a way, it almost became like Star Wars Episode 1, where the hype had built up so much that the movie didn't stand a chance of actually pleasing the audience. Granted, that movie is bad, but the EOS R5 I don't think is as bad as Star Wars Episode 1, if that's the comparison that we want to do. But the hype around it, I think it's going to be tough to... It's just going to be tough to meet those expectations. And very quickly, people are excited, because Canon announced this thing back in February. Then little details were leaking, and people are like, what? It shoots 8K. It's no crop at any resolution. Are you serious? And then Canon announces more and more and more, and people lose their minds. And then within a few days, all the bad stuff starts coming out, which is mostly just about the camera overheating. I don't really want to get into that too much because the discussion so far at this point in time is really coming from people reading spec sheets. And since people don't really have the camera in hand, none of it is, for the most part, first-hand experience with an actual production model. So it's just a lot of, I mean, it literally, as you can tell, just a lot of like hype, a lot of people getting upset over nothing, and a lot of people taking advantage of that to get views and clicks and whatnot. But I found a comment on Reddit, and this will all kind of tie around in a second. I was reading on the videography subreddit, which I actually really enjoy because it's like the friendliest of the video making subreddits. Let's see if I can find it real quick. So this was a couple nights ago. There was a thread about the R5, and of course people are like, oh, it's absolute garbage. There's a 30-minute recording limit. It overheats in 8K. It overheats in 4K 120. It overheats in 4K 60. It overheats in 4K ultra quality where it's downsampling from the 8K sensor. Oh my God. The only thing it doesn't overheat in is just 4K, like regular 4K. And then I was thinking to myself, okay, no pun intended, I wish the camera didn't overheat, of course, but it's no surprise to me that it would overheat at 8K. Of course, that makes sense. 4K 120, that's not even a thing we expected to get. So sure, if you can only do a little bit of time before it overheats. 4K 60, okay, that's something that, I can see needing to use that for longer periods of time. But what people were asking for, including me, I was like, I would like a Canon camera that has full frame 4K, no crop. This camera delivers that with no overheating. If you do the ultra quality 4K, then you can get into overheating, and so it's like, it's almost like we're given these things that we didn't even necessarily ask for, and then we're complaining about it. I was thinking of it, it's like Canon backed this money truck up to my house, but they didn't like organize the bills by serial number. So what am I supposed to do with that? It's like, just take the, just enjoy what you actually got and make do with the rest. But there's a comment on the subreddit that I will read here, where in the thread where people were criticizing all the, perceived shortcomings of the R5, this person said, the amount of misinformation going around isn't surprising considering the world today. Basically, everyone asked Canon for a full-frame camera that shoots 4K, 422, 10-bit with no crop, IBIS, and dual-pixel autofocus. They did exactly this. Those were my thoughts. Me. And this person goes on to say, then Canon threw everyone a bone and basically said, here, we'll give you 8K raw sensor readout and 4K 120. And though, yes, it'll overheat, you might as well use it instead of us locking the feature and having the Magic Lantern guys be the ones that unlock it later on. Basically, it's them giving everyone a bonus. Might as well use what you can if it's possible. Now everyone is upset before even getting the camera. Regular 4K is fine and isn't on the sheet for overheating. It's the new oversampled 4K. And 4K 60 can go almost 40 minutes before overheating. Are we really surprised? Seriously? We're surprised a small mirrorless camera has to restrict heat for a camera, or are we just flipping our gasket because it's actually written down? 8K is a luxury mode for now. Use it for a few minutes here and there. 4K 120 is something nobody even asked for. What everyone did ask for, they got. Everyone is complaining their 5-star steak didn't come with truffle oil. Again, regular 4K, 422, 10-bit, not crop, no heat issues that we know of. Regular 4K, 422, 10-bit, 60 frames, almost 40 minutes, which is way past the record limit anyways. Those are the two recording modes everyone asked for, and they're not cropped. And there's IBIS, and there's 10-bit, and there's dual pixel autofocus. It's literally what everyone said would be their dream camera. All these YouTubers complaining about 8K RAW and 4K 120. That's not even the specs they said they wanted. They got what they wanted, and there are no issues with those specs. It's just a bunch of noise to make headlines. People need something to be angry at all times in this day and age. Nobody wanted 8K RAW. Nobody expected 4K 20. Kudos to Canon. They didn't hold back, and they were transparent. They gave people what was possible with the tech in the body design they wanted. That was just like a comment that sort of took all the things I was feeling and just summed them up right there. So I appreciated, that was how I feel about it. Lots of people have been asking me. That's essentially how I feel, at least until we start getting them and seeing how these things perform in the real world. The other thought, though, is that originally, pre-COVID and quarantine, Canon's goal with this camera was to have it be like the superstar at the 2020 Olympics, which in my mind means that the camera has to function really well, right? Like it can't be an Olympic camera, someone taking photos at the Olympics, It can't let you down. It can't fail. It can't have issues. It has to deliver. And so I feel like it must have been designed with that in mind. And then there's the R6, which like no one really talked about and just showed up as like, hey, here's this other incredible option for like way cheaper. And, you know, people are trying to find fault with that. Anyway, my point is those arguments are sort of fun to read sometimes, but they divide people into those three camps. The people who are, this is amazing and everything's great. The people who are, this is terrible. And once again, Canon pulls out the cripple hammer. You know, what's Sony going to do? Which, by the way, I've heard a few things about the new Sony camera and it sounds very interesting. And I think all the competition is good. And then there's the third camp, which is, you know, gear doesn't matter, man. It's all about story. And that's where I have grown fatigued because, yes, story, I guess. I mean, I would almost argue that you would want to say purpose instead of story because, sure, if I'm thinking of my own video, so I'll use myself as an example. If I'm making a video of my Final Cut Pro workflow, there's not necessarily like a compelling story there. You could argue that like, well, the story is somebody who is a one-person, you know, production crew needs to manage all their stuff, organize their footage, organize their products, and do it efficiently and effectively. And here's the method that they can use to do that. And now they're happy because they've achieved this goal. And I guess that's like kind of a story. It's not like the most interesting story in the world, but with a purpose, I think that makes sense. So this video has a purpose, which is to help people. And I'm just talking about my most recent video, which is exactly what I'm talking about, the Final Cut workflow. There's a purpose there. Hey, you work in Final Cut. It can be totally crazy to organize all your media and all these clips and all your projects. Here's what I do that works for me. I want to share that with you. I think that might help you be more organized with your projects. There we go. Again, not an Academy Award-winning story by any means, but full of purpose. And so I think the story matters above all cliche, especially because so many people aren't necessarily doing anything with stories as we think of them traditionally. I'd almost argue, let's say purpose. Purpose matters above all. And I can agree, but the gear does matter because it's going back to, you know, getting in arguments with outside organizations at school about the purpose of gear. I felt like it was devaluing the thing that I was doing as a teacher, which is trying to teach these tech skills. And people don't think it matters until it does, until they want to film something or they hire someone to film something. And it's like, now we're in a dark room. Why doesn't it look good? Okay, well, you need someone who knows how to use gear and has access to the right gear to do what you need to do in that environment. Even Heather, my wife, who is notorious for saying like she doesn't want to be bogged down by gear because she wants the tools to get out of the way so she can explore her idea and the thing that she wants to make. Even like, you know, she talks about, well, the gear does matter sometimes because she's seen the difference. You know, if you have one thing versus another thing, the end result can be significantly better. Doesn't mean you need to be a total gearhead and bogged down by everything, but yeah, the gear does matter. No, you're not going to get the same results from your phone as from like the Canon R5. It's just not a thing that's really going to happen. You can get great results from your phone, great results from the Canon, but the Canon's going to do things and be able to, you know, give you access to things that the phone just can't. And that's just the way that it is. And sometimes that is a barrier where if you want those things, there's no other way to do it besides just investing in the gear and the thing that you want and that you need. So there's definitely a level of diminishing returns. You know, if you're shooting only something on your phone and then you upgrade to a DSLR or a mirrorless camera, let's say you're using your phone and then you get like a Canon Rebel or, you know, like a Sony a6400, that kind of level camera, maybe like an $800 to $1,000 camera, maybe a Canon RP. The difference in quality of what you're making from your phone to that camera is going to be huge. You're going to notice like, wow, this just looks better. It sounds better. Like, you know, it gives me more options for connecting microphones and headphones and all that stuff and using different lenses. And then, you know, if you invest in a decent lens, so the camera comes with like a kit lens, which is usually pretty slow. you invest in like a really fast prime or a really nice zoom or something, and then you're going to see, boom, another jump in quality. Maybe going from something like a cropped Rebel to a full frame mirrorless, you're going to see another bump up in quality. But then going from something like the EOS R to the R6, or the R6 to the R5, or the EOS R to the 1D, you're going to be spending a lot more money to make those leaps, and the differences aren't going to be as much. And, I've seen plenty of setups where people on YouTube will have these huge, like they'll be using a Cinema Series camera with all kinds of audio gear and monitors and this and that. And the end result they're getting, I don't think looks any better than what I'm getting just by setting up my EOS R, like on a tripod. And I know that there's, you could argue that point, but I really think the result is kind of the same. And then I think that for the people using those setups, using that setup is kind of part of the fun, like setting those things up and working with those things and figuring it out and controlling it the way that they do and being able to be ultra consistent. I think that is part of the fun. It's not necessarily delivering a better end result. So they're using $15,000 worth of gear, and I'm using, I don't know, $3,000 worth of gear with lens and microphone included. And we're getting results that aren't that different. But the difference in my $3,000 worth of gear versus like, a $500 camera or a phone or something is going to be huge. And, there's always those diminishing returns. And so you got to find this balance. Plus, there's also just the issue of reliability. If you, buy the cheapest thing that's available on Amazon, it might get the job done, but it's probably not going to last the longest time. If you invest a little bit more money in the better thing, it probably will last a long time. And the reason I bring that up is because I saw this addressed in a way I had never seen it addressed before a few weeks ago, and I loved it. It was on Peter Lindgren's YouTube channel, which if you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. It's a wonderful channel that has completely exploded over the past year. He does a lot of, video production, videography, photo stuff, YouTube-related things. Side note, he and I actually started a podcast together, a separate one, which is in the process of being, uploaded or approved by all the platforms, but it's just called A Podcast with Peter and Tom. So you can search for it on, Apple, Spotify, Google, all the places. So that's actually super fun, but that's not why I brought this up. It was because on one of his videos a couple months ago, he was talking about lighting, and he was talking about how he uses lighting in his studio, and he was using some really nice lights. I think he had 2 or 3 studio lights, like aperture lights and Nan lights. Basically, each light costs a couple $100. There's, soft boxes on them. There's the light stands. There's financial investment being made to do these things. But then he's explaining, okay, I got this light here. It's going to deliver this quality of light, and I'm going to place it here to get this effect. This light over here serves this purpose. It delivers this quality of light. I'm going to place it here. And he was showing different ways to use these lights to make things look really good. And in the comments, there was one comment I saw from someone that was like, this looks great. I love this setup. I can't afford any of this. What should I do? And I get those comments on my YouTube channel too. And this is where it blew my mind, because what I would do, at least up until this point, when I get a comment like that, is I would really think about it, and I would try to be as encouraging as possible. And I would say, okay, if I just made a video talking about using 3 professional level lights to achieve a goal, and you're saying you don't have the money for those, okay, here's what you could do. Maybe here's some recommendations for lower cost things that might not last as long, but might get the job done for now. You could take, what if you took your desk lamp and you put a really bright bulb in it and you diffused it with a shower curtain that's like, $20 all in terms of cost, and maybe that's going to deliver something. Like, I'd try to be inventive in getting this person a solution, which would end up, like maybe being helpful to them, but would end up probably not being super helpful, because I don't think they'd follow all those steps, but also then ends up taking like 20 minutes of my time as like research this solution. And Peter, who's an ultra nice guy and very responsive to his community, just responded, invest in lighting, period. And I was like, oh my God, what a great, yes, that's what you need to do. Of course. Like, that's not being discouraging. That's not being rude. It's saying if you are making videos and you care about your lighting and you want to improve your lighting and you want to get, the lighting that you're seeing here in this video, you need to invest in lighting. And that's it. That means saving some money. If this person was younger, getting a job, getting a second job, like doing what you got to do to be able to make the investment you want to make to achieve the results that you want to make. You might be able to like jerry rig something together using weird household parts like MacGyver where somehow it kind of works, but that's not going to give you the actual results you want. It's not going to be reliable. It's probably not going to be the most enjoyable process, and it's just going to take more time and energy as opposed to just going, look, the thing I need to deliver the results I want is going to require a financial investment. If I want that, well, I'm going to make that financial investment the end. And I thought that was just such a brilliant way to address that thing, because at a certain point, that's true. Like, you want this result, okay, you have to like pony up and make the investment. If you don't want to make the investment, that's 100% fine. You don't have to buy expensive lights, but then don't expect to get these results. The end. And I know that sounds so simple, but I don't think people are told that enough, because I know, even my students, like I mentioned before, who don't come for the most part from places of privilege, are pretty willing to work. Like when I have a kid that gets really into photography or videography and they want to get their own camera, like they'll be, I can't think of the word, ingenuitive. I don't know if that's an actual word or not. And they will use ingenuity to get what they need to get done. And that means, okay, I want my own Canon EOS R. That's $1,700. I don't have that. Okay, well here, I'm going to get a part-time job. I'm going to check out cameras from my high school program. I'm going to take photos for people, charge them to do photo sessions, save that money. I'm going to help out this family member over here, and they'll pay me. Like, I find people like scrapping and scrimping and saving to get what they need to do. And it's not quick. Sometimes it takes a year. Sometimes it takes, 6 months to get to where they need to go. But they get there. Then they get the thing that they work so hard for. And then they value the bejesus out of it. And they take really good care of it. And they use it to its full, like, potential. Like, they really max out, learn everything about it. And that to me, that whole journey right there is so much more valuable than just either being given something at no cost or, like cheaply trying to rig something together that's going to be crappy. Because then you're going to still feel like, well, my stuff doesn't look as good, must be the gear, yada, yada, yada. And I kind of call it bottom feeding, because I've seen that so many times. I've seen bottom feeding with my students, and I've seen it with just people I've met where, there's so many times I'll get a message or an email from someone that says, hey, we're starting a podcast. We want it to sound good. We also want it to be a video podcast. We love to have 3 camera angles. We want to do it live, so we want to be able to switch between the 3 camera angles live. Our budget is $800. What do you recommend? And I'm like, well, that's enough to get you, an audio setup, kind of, or like 1 camera. But the thing that you're telling me is thousands and thousands of dollars that you're going to need to invest. And there's no real way around it. And then they'll, hit back with things like, well, what if I use like this old camcorder? And what if I use this? And it's like, sure, figure that stuff out. But that's like, if you want to do something and there's certain tools you need to do it, you just got to get those tools. Like, if you've ever built something, like, let's leave the camera world for a second. Let's go into just like crafting and building stuff. Anytime you've tried to do something without using the right tool, like, have you ever tried to saw a piece of wood just using like an old crappy handsaw, and you're trying to get a nice precise cut, and then later on you're able to use like a power saw or a table saw that just instantly delivers a perfect cut exactly where you needed it? And the difference you experience between using the right tool for the job versus the wrong tool for the job is like exponential. It's kind of the same thing here. And it's like, there's a reason that so many people go to school for so many years to learn this stuff. There's a reason so many people put in decades to build up careers in these fields. When you think of on a movie set, there's people whose entire careers are based around lighting, whose entire careers are based around audio or cameras. That's not because those are easy things to master. It's because they become highly specialized. But you can put that professional lighting person in any environment and they will tell you exactly what is needed to get exactly the result that you want. And sometimes they'll say, I need this piece of gear. And if you say, sorry, I can't do it, then they'll say, sorry, we're not going to get the result that you want. End of story. And I think that it is important to, do that because in a way it can almost be discouraging to be told story is all that matters, gear doesn't matter. And at first you feel empowered because you're like, yeah, you're right. I'll just use whatever I have. And you go out and you try to make something with whatever's around. And then it just doesn't come out as good as you wanted. And it doesn't hit the standard that you were hoping. And some of that might just be you need more practice and you need more reps, and that's fine. But the other part of that is maybe you're trying to do something that you literally just cannot do with what you have. But now you're kind of blaming yourself for it. You're getting discouraged and then you stop. Whereas if you had the right tool for the job, you would be able to practice, improve, and start getting the results that you were after in the first place. And I sure hope this doesn't just sound, I feel like maybe I have ranted a little more than I want to. And I don't want that to be the case. I don't want to just be like angry guy ranting about like cameras because why? But what I think is important is I know for me there have been enough times, whether it's camera stuff or another hobby or a work-related thing, whatever it is, where I sit there and I try to just like make it work with what I've got. And there's definitely value to that. And that can be something that teaches you a certain level of resourcefulness. But at the same time, there have been enough instances where it's like, I can try really hard and spend a lot of time and energy to create something that doesn't give me nearly the result I'm looking for, or I can just invest in the right tool that's going to give me the result I'm looking for, and then that's it. And then I can just move on and I can use that and keep getting better and whatnot. Or just admit to myself, hey, I don't want to make that investment in that thing. And that means I'm not going to get that result that I was after. And then just being okay with that and going, okay, I will put having that result out of my mind and I will move, into other ways and want to do sort of other things. I think that is important. And I think it's going to be different from everyone. Obviously, a young kid is going to have, different access than an adult with a full career, full salary position. And, finances are limiting and it's a part of it. But if you're somebody who's in the world of creating something, podcast, video, whatever, that you have to make some kind of investment in gear. And typically, that kind of snowballs. You get your one piece of gear to start your one thing, and then you realize, well, wouldn't it be cool if I could also do this? Okay, then I need another piece of gear. Wouldn't it be cool if it could do this? And then another and another. And it just kind of goes and goes and goes from there. And I've just seen, this conversation just popped up recently with the release or the announcement of new cameras. And it was on my mind, and it's been so interesting to read the discussions online and see where people are falling in these camps. And I fully also recognize, like, we're talking about cameras in a world where there's like a global pandemic and things. So I enjoy being able to take a break from the reality of the world to just talk about, like, do you really need 8K video? Well, I don't know. It would be kind of cool. No, everything I film has to be 8K. Like, that just, in a way, has like an innocence to it that is really fun to be able to focus on. So to kind of summarize, just invest when you need to invest. Just like Peter said, if you want really good lighting, what do? Invest in your lighting. The end. It doesn't really need to be more complicated than that. For today, I was going to do a Gear of the Week segment, which I still could, and maybe I still will, but I've also got 2 voice messages, and both of these messages are almost like tech support related. So I wanted to play them, kind of acknowledge them, answer them, and then almost use it as like a tech support segment. So Both of these were sent to me on Anchor. If you want to send in a voice message to be included in an upcoming show, if you have thoughts, especially about today's discussion, or if you have anything else that you want to share, feel free. You can just go to anchor.fm/enthusiasm and click the little button that says, leave a message or send a message. Our first message today is from News Nachos, which sounds like a younger guy, and I think that is pretty darn exciting.
I really like your podcast. It's very interesting. I really need to find under £100 handy recorder for 2 people for my podcast, News Nachos. If you have any recommendations, could you maybe send me an email?
I'm going to pause it right there because then he gives me his email, and I don't want that to go out to everyone. The reason also that I didn't email, so if you're listening, I'm sorry, is the message kind of cut out and I couldn't hear the full email address. But basically what he's asking for is I have $100 in my budget, and I'm looking for an audio recorder that will let me record 2 people for a podcast. Are there any recommendations? And I do have a few. Going off our discussion for this episode, if you can increase the budget, you're going to get something that's going to exactly cover what you need. I would recommend something like the Zoom H4n, which I think is just under $200, or even better, the Zoom H5, which is about $250. Granted, that is more expensive than what we've talked about, but both of those have built-in microphones and 2 XLR ports. So in theory, you could actually have 3 people included, but having those XLR ports right on the bottom opens up such a world of options for different mics that you can use, and both of those recorders deliver really good results. However, you can make this work for the $100 price range. What I would recommend is something like a Zoom H1, and then what you can do, the Zoom H1 is a very small digital recorder, and it has a built-in microphone, which is actually very good. It has a tripod mount on the bottom, so you can put it on like a little tiny desk tripod or something, and it'll mount it so it's positioned right. And it also has a microphone input, so you could plug in like a lavalier microphone, clip that on somebody's shirt, and one person can be talking to the built-in mic, one person can be talking to the lavalier mic, and then you've got your 2 people. Or, this is sort of, I don't mean to undercut exactly what I've been talking about, but this is a solution that would work. You can literally just have 2 people record into their phones separately and then combine those audio files. So I mentioned that Peter and I were doing a podcast, Peter Lindgren and I. He lives in Sweden and I live in California. So we are not able to be in the same room, but we want the audio quality to be good. I'm using my Rodecaster. He's getting a Rodecaster, but is currently using a USB mic. We just record each end of our conversation. So like we're FaceTiming so we can see each other, and we have the FaceTime audio, which is terrible. But then I'm recording just my voice on my Rodecaster. He's recording just his voice on his computer. And then he sends me the file, and I can just sync them up. And it's super easy because I can just see, the waveforms of when I'm talking. I can see the waveforms when he's talking, and you can see the conversation because we're bouncing back and forth. And it syncs up, and it's super high quality, and it literally sounds like we're sitting in the same room. Super, super easy. You can do the same thing with the phone, and I bring this up because Heather gave me this idea because it's how she did her very first podcast. She recorded on her phone, her roommate recorded on her phone, and they sync the files up together, and it sounded great. You don't even need to be in the same room. Just use like the voice memo app. So I know I just spent all this time saying like invest, invest, invest. That would be my number one thing. Get something like the Zoom H5 or the Zoom H4n. The Zoom H1 works great for $100. But to achieve what you want to do, a podcast with 2 people, you can make it work for £100 or $100, and you can also make it work maybe with even a phone. I'm recommending that because you can still get good results. Our next message is from CJ's Roundtable.
Hi, Tom. This is CJ. I do a podcast called The Rock Roundtable, and I was watching your review for the Rode Podcast Pro, and I've been researching the product, and I think you might be a guy who could help me. So here's the question. Can I record onto the Rode Podcast Pro and then upload that directly to Anchor using nothing but my iPhone. That's what I'm trying to figure out. If you could give me a thumbs up or thumbs down on that, that'd be awesome. Thanks, Tom.
Okay, so I thanks so much for that message. I can't give you a thumbs up or a thumbs down. I can give you like a sideways sort of like kind of thumb. And there might be ways around this. The thing that immediately popped to my mind, which is not what you had said, is using an iPad. Because if you happen to have a newer iPad that has a USB-C port, the Rodecaster Pro has a USB-C port. You can connect the two, and the Rodecaster will show up in the iPad. And then I don't know that it would let you necessarily transfer the file directly, but you could literally just like press play on the Rodecaster, record it into like GarageBand on the iPad, just transfer the file that way in real time, and then export it there. It's a little clunky, but it could get the job done. And otherwise, the answer is just kind of no. You do need to get it onto a computer somehow. And that computer doesn't even, well, if you're on a computer, of course, you probably have internet access. Yeah, you just got to use a computer. It's just kind of one of those things like we just talked about. You don't need to have any editing software on the computer, but something to import the file and then internet access to upload it to Anchor. And that's going to get the job done. Unless I'm wrong, there's no way to directly do it just to your phone. It could be wrong, and maybe if you're using an Android phone, there might be a way, but I'm just not familiar with Android phones. So I appreciate both of those messages, anchor.fm/enthusiasm if you want to leave a message. It's really fun just to hear. I just like having other people involved with the show. So if you want to send me one, feel free, because I would love to have you be a part of the show. And why not? Let's just jump in and do... Oh, it's supposed to be slick. Let's just jump in. There we go. And do a Gear of the Week segment. Because I did something that's actually I've gotten something that's actually been really helpful, which is the Edelkrone HeadONE. So a while ago, I got the Edelkrone Slider one on discount at B&H, which is a motorized slider. It works really, really well. And then I've got the HeadONE now, which a couple weeks ago was on deal of the day at B&H. And so I was able to get it for a bit cheaper. And the two together are really cool because now you have motorized sliding and panning. So you put your tripod head on the HeadONE. It can pan left to right or rotate. Put that on the slider, and the slider's moving, forward or backwards or left and right. And then you can program all these really cool motorized shots. It can't tilt up or down. You would need like another piece to do that. But it can do everything else, get you some nice like parallax effect. It has built-in time-lapse features, stop-motion features, all kinds of cool stuff. I love it because it's so easy. Like as soon as you open the app, the Edelkrone app automatically detects all of the different pieces and then pairs them together immediately and gives you an interface that lets you use those specific devices. So it's really cool. But the thing I've been doing with it is setting it to do like an infinite move where it's essentially like just going back and forth while keeping me and Heather, or Heather and I, in frame while we're doing live streams and stuff. And we did this on my channel, we did this on her channel in the past week, and it's going pretty slow, but it's just like very slowly throughout the stream, the camera's just kind of moving a little bit, where normally it would be an hour or two of us just sitting there, one camera shot, one angle. This just adds a little bit of dynamic movement. I didn't know if anyone was going to like it, but we actually got a lot of positive feedback and positive comments, and I think that that's really fun. It's something I wouldn't have been able to do without these pieces of gear. Plus, if you want to do any kind of motion, not motion tracking, but I don't know, just motion effects where you're combining multiple shots that have the exact same movement in them, you need something like this. And the reason I really like them is because they take the same Canon batteries as my cameras. So even though it's not a Canon product, they take the same LPE6 batteries that are in like most of Canon cameras for the past 10 years or so. And it's just awesome because now I have my cameras, my slider, and my motorized head all take the same battery, and in turn, of course, the same battery charger. And that just makes things really, really easy. I still feel bad if I got a little too ranty today, but I just want people to know when it is important to make investments and not just fall into the platitudes of like, yeah, just get it done. Just use what you got. Story is king. And it's like, yeah, sure. But if your purpose is great and your story is great, do what you can to serve that in a way that looks and sounds as good as possible. And that's going to be the best for your idea. And it's also going to be the most encouraging to you as the person who's trying to make the thing. So next week, I'll make sure to like hit something that's maybe just like clearly positive, because I don't want negative podcast experience. But I really wanted to get that out there and get those ideas, those thoughts that have just been living inside my brain for so long. I needed to get them out. And I appreciate everybody who sent in messages. Again, I am at SodarnTom on all the things. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen. Feel free to reach out and let me know if you have any thoughts, comments, leave messages. Until then, that sounded like I was going to end this in a cool way. But until then, have a great week. Stay safe. Thanks so much for spending some of your time with me today.